I'm live. Last time I checked, that was a good thing. Welcome. You can come back over here. Toltec discussions with Golden Eagle. That would be me, Golden Eagle. And we're here talking about your quest to find and master yourself. This series of discussions is called In Quest of Self. And we're bringing in some slightly non-Toltec knowledge with a series of discussions about different forms of an energy map called the Tree of Life. Just to recap, because we took last week off, and some of you may not remember, we're talking about not just the Kabbalistic Tree of Life from the Hebrew tradition, which forms the basis for both the Old Testament and the New Testament. We're also talking about the Celtic Tree of Life, the Nordic Tree of Life, and we might eventually throw in a few others. But right now we're in the midst of talking about different configurations of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and so that's where we're going to go. Can we go over here? Today I'm going to be focusing primarily on the upper half of the Tree of Life. And so what you see here are the three pathways I've drawn in blue. Hopefully your computer will allow you to see that that's blue. That these are ones we talked about last week. And then the ones in red I'm hoping to get through this week. I have the circles representing the Sephiroth, Kether, Hokmah, Binah, Hesed, Geberah, and Tiphareth, which are the upper six Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. So each of those, let's come over to this for just a moment. Each of these...
I'm not seeing the upper half of the tree.
Oh dear, never mind. We'll go back to this drawing. This is where we're going to spend most of the time. Each of these, so Kether, Hokmah, Binah, Geberah, Hesed, and Tiphareth, all have different energies, qualities associated with them. And so then we started talking about the paths after we covered the Sephiroth. And I'm not sure that I said everything I needed to say about the nature of the paths, other than they connect the Sephiroth. So I'm going to take just a couple minutes and do that. So first we have Hesed and Binah. This is the archetypal male, this is the archetypal female. So the Divine Father, the Divine Mother. And the same for any two of the Sephiroth that have a pathway connecting them. The pathway is something which not only moves energy from one Sephiroth to the other, it is the mechanism by which the balance of the two Sephiroth occurs. So in terms of electrical circuit analysis, each pathway functions both as a connection, like just a wire. It also functions as a filter that only allows certain energies to pass. So Hokmah radiates its full radiation of energies, but not all of them come to Binah. It's putting them all out in all directions simultaneously, but the radiations that make it through to Binah on the path of Daleth, the door, or in Tarot, the Empress, those radiations are only carefully selected ones. They make it through this filter function on each of these pathways. The pathway, though, isn't just a conduit of energy and selecting for energies. It also has an inherent intelligence all its own. So Daleth, the door, you can think of it as like a semiconductor computer. It's got hard coded into the chip certain programming. So it's a conduit, it's a filter, and it's a ROM chip, a read-only memory. It does the same thing all the time. So for those of you with an engineering background, that's for you. For those with absolutely no clue what I just said, the rest of tonight is for you. Just know that the Tiphareth balances, it selectively transmits information and energy, and it has its own innate intelligence. So that's a crucial piece of understanding about all the pathways on the tree that we need to remember. And when you're trying to learn the path, you can gain a lot of information just by looking at the energy of the two Sephiroth that you're trying to interconnect and say, okay, what kind of energy is going to balance these two? So let's go back over here to Daleth, the door. We started last week talking about, or finished last week rather, talking about the path of Gamel that runs from Tiphareth up to Kether, which is the card of the High Priestess in the Tarot. So this is the aspect, it's ruled and governed by the aspect of the Divine Feminine that very carefully controls the highest level of ritual understanding of the holiest portion of God that is attainable from man who's climbing the tree. That access way is ruled by the High Priestess. Now right here at the intersection of the path of Gamel and the path of Daleth, you are basically getting into the vicinity of the Sephira that is not a Sephira, called Da'ath, which is in the abyss. The abyss is between the upper triad and the middle triad, and somewhere here at a poorly defined location, because it doesn't really exist except that it does, is the sphere that isn't a sphere called Daleth, which represents...
Dolph, not Dolph.
Did I say Daleth? No. Daleth is the path. Thank you. Appreciate that. Da'ath, which is the supreme knowledge it takes and is required to get your consciousness up into the supernal triad. So Daleth is the doorway you have to go through when you're making that crossing. I'll have more to say about crossing the abyss as we go. There's a little more tonight, because most of the paths we're talking about tonight are in fact the paths that cross the abyss. And I paused because I just realized I did not identify this one over here. So that'll be my first dingy-ding question, if anybody gets it right, is in both Kabbalistic terms and Tarot terms, what is that path? So go ahead, type it in. When I get a correct answer, somebody gets a ding. So Daleth, the door, is the doorway into higher consciousness, and it's ruled in Tarot by the Empress. This is the highest aspect of the Divine Feminine that forms as soon as Binah forms by this energetic projection from Hokmah. So Hokmah, the Divine Male, forms, then the next sphere is Binah, and then instantly that causes Daleth to form, and the card or the path we just discussed last time, Beth, which means house. Think of that as your personal temple in the higher planes. Or the Magus or magician in the Tarot, which is the supreme, all-knowledgeable aspect of the divine masculine. So the Empress is the ruler, as opposed to the High Priestess, who serves and regulates and controls the temple. The Empress this path, the creation of this path out of Hokmah to Binah, is the actual source of the story in the book of Genesis about Adam and Eve, and the woman was formed by taking something out of the side of the man. That's a metaphor for this pathway and how the universe is created. Remember, at this point, we're still trying to create that archetypal divine human as energy moves down, and then this represents that first split into polarity. We'll talk about the split into duality a little more when we get to the path of the lovers, which is marked. Who have we got online, by the way? Anybody yet?
Mohadib,
Muad'Dib, hello.
Dennis Brown,
Hi, Dennis.
and George G.
George G. Gee, George, I was hoping to hook up with you last week. Sorry you couldn't make it. Do plan on hooking up with the gang that's traveling north to help EJ on the 20th, 21st, 22nd, that weekend there. If you can, if you're actually able to do that, I'm sure your dear sweet mother Pilar will be able to give you the particulars on when the travel takes place. I would love to have you help. Yeah.
Just wanted to mention that you might mention that event, but that apparently Coyote is going to be doing one of his first tellings at EJ's.
Really? That Saturday night?
I'm not sure what the specifics are, but that should be temptation for those who have not seen a telling and are in a position to help out that weekend.
Thank you, Oria Luce, because I did not know that little factoid, and I had just gotten off the phone with Coyote a half an hour ago. We had totally different things to talk about, some of my own personal work. So, the event, for those of you who haven't been reading my emails, frowny glare, E.J. Gold, of course, is the internationally famous shaman of Grass Valley, and he's moving some stuff and consolidating some spaces as their work changed. They basically had some things, and they're cleaning house, like pretty much that's the MO when you talk to everybody doing the higher level spiritual work, is we're all purging what no longer serves. So EJ did some things like, he used to have the actual professional equipment to run a casino. So craps tables and all that stuff. I'm not a gambler, so I consider gambling to be a tax on people who can't do math. So I don't play the lottery and I don't gamble in casinos. So anyway, whatever else he got rid of, he's made some room, so now that permits him to consolidate things down and do that. So he has requested help from Coyote School and my school for physical labor. So we're going to go down and we're going to move boxes basically for a weekend. And I invite you and encourage you all, if you're able, to come down and participate. If you've never met EJ, this will be a great opportunity. And now there's more. Coyote is going to be doing a telling. I just learned this myself. So if you're able, we would appreciate the help. It is a supreme act of service for someone who has dedicated and devoted his life to the service of humanity. And the things he has done, 99.999% of humanity will never know what he's done to help you. So please come if you can. So that's the path of Empress. It's one of the feminine paths. And as we go through here, we have a lot of feminine paths, a lot of male paths, and they both are inside us, whether we are male or female. And so that's what's often meant when we work on balancing a path, that we have to balance the male and female inside us, but we all do. So the path of Beth, the house or the magician, and Aleph the ox or the path of the fool, and Daleth the door or the empress Those three paths comprise the supernal triad. This is the highest divine aspects of ourselves and the universe. And as we work the tree, whether we're going up or down, we find that we're always working these triangles. And so the supernal triad is an entity. Yes.
So if the Empress, you said basically, that it's showing that division of mankind from God to the divine masculine, then into the divine feminine. So that's kind of showing creation type of energy. But you also said that being ruled by the Empress, that's a balancing force. So I find it interesting. I haven't read that much about the Empress to know off the top of my head exactly all of her attributes. But that at that high level of the tree, the two original, male-female forces are balanced by the Empress.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. Would you like to speak on that more?
You'll notice that whether it's Daleth the door or the high priestess, the access to the supernal triad and that highest state of divine consciousness that represents is the access is regulated by the divine feminine. Okay? So that tells us, and it ties in with a lot of the mythological stories, that you can't storm heaven by force. Right? Everybody, you try to storm heaven and fight God to gain what you feel is yours, you lose. You never make it. There's never a story of storming heaven where you actually win. I mean, this is Tolkien, for example, J.R.R. Tolkien. I can never remember the two R's. I think one of them's Rutherford and the other, anyway. He wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and The Silmarillion and a host of other books which were the backstory to that. He took and drew heavily on Celtic, Nordic, and Germanic mythology. And just like there was a war in heaven in the Norse Tree of Life that we talked a couple months ago, he has the same story. They try to take heaven by force, they're defeated and thrown out, and then they're stuck down in the physical world, and that's their lot for eternity, right? So you can't gain that by force. But this is an interesting question because it leads to what's the difference between the male force and the female force in the tree and in us. There's actually a really good example of this in the movie about Cleopatra that starred Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Thank you. I knew the theater expert over here would remember all of that. And I can't remember if it's when Julius Caesar shows up or when Mark Antony shows up. And she receives this conquering hero basically on her casting couch. So she's on this bed with a slightly reclined head and she's all draped out. And her goal in this negotiation is to gain as much as she can for her kingdom. Camera's over here, right? Yeah. And so she basically gets him to a point where he's going to kiss her. And she is like a limp, cold fish. And she doesn't move, just stands there. And he's like, there's nothing on her side. And she basically saying, you can take me by force, but this is all you get. Yes, you have the power to... And she's metaphorically referring to Egypt as a whole, not just her and her body. And then she says, and then she gives him this classic Hollywood passionate kiss that has him quivering and melting. And he's out of breath just from one of her kisses, right? And she says, or you can have that. But you don't get that if you try to take it by force. So that's the way that the divine female force works. It's nothing at all like the divine male force. It's receptive. So if you want to conquer heaven, if you want to gain that supernal triad someday by being successful at crossing the abyss, you have to have developed and nurtured and mastered that within you. That receptive force, that creative force. Remember some of the medieval symbolism. Thank you. Somebody up there. The medieval symbolism regarding the chalice and the sword, or the lance and the cup, right? Gee, I bet we could figure out what of the two genders the sword represents and which the cup represents, right? The cup is the divine feminine, the sword is the divine masculine. So there's a formula for how to do this and balance of that, and that formula is really contained well in the information for the card of the Lovers, which I hope we can make it to tonight. And if we don't get through this, we'll just keep going until we do. One of the other sources I was reading said of the Lover's card, I'm jumping ahead and I'm aware of it, that the symbolism that Crowley put in his deck is the most over revealing of the secrets of this path and that tarot card of anybody else who had gone before. There was, especially from medieval times onward, the tarot seems to date from somewhere in the 1300s, at least that's all we have a record of, but it was fairly complete at that time, which means it wasn't invented out of thin air. There was a tradition before that. But that Crowley's version of the Lovers does more to reveal that than anybody else's deck. And back then they were really trying hard to hide stuff because they didn't want to get burned at the stake, because that was a real threat. Now when we get over here in just a little bit to the Hierophant, we're going to talk more about how the Christian and the Roman Catholic Church's influence on all matters esoteric heavily influenced a lot of the symbolism, in especially the tarot. Now keep in mind though, that this goes back thousands of years, long before Christianity, and in particular the Hebrew side of this, they don't have a card called the Lovers. They have a path called Zayin, or the sword. They have a path called Daleth, the door, and the symbolism was very obscure, and it relied heavily on an oral tradition, which in my opinion to this day has never been written down. It was the Western alchemists, the Western magicians, who started writing a lot of this down, beginning primarily in the 1800s. That's when this material really started to bloom and be fleshed out and be brought into more usable, practical format rather than just a meditative guide for a few Jewish mystics, which is kind of what it was. The Hebrew tradition didn't really have much practical day-to-day application, and certainly not for most people. Only the high priests were studying this, and the firstborn sons. So back to your question, is you find that interesting? Yes, it's interesting, and the answer to why that should be the case is it's the divine feminine half that tells us the formula we're going to need for crossing the abyss. Does that kind of sort of answer your question?
Sure.
Because if not, I can make up some more. Any other questions online? Yeah.
Not really. Mohadib is on the floor with her markers and poster board, finally making her own Tree of Life drawing.
Yay!
And she said if somebody will pick her up, that she can come to EJ's. She's free that weekend, so we'll work that out.
Oh, well, I'll probably be driving down past Red Bluff If you stand by the freeway with your thumb out, I might be able to work that out. Okay, so if there's no questions about Daleth as the door or the Empress Path, I was just saying, the work of the triads is you have a polar opposite extremes that has to be balanced, and when it is balanced, I lost my pointer, it more fully activates the sphere in the middle. So when you balance your divine feminine and your divine masculine within you, you make it easier to attain that divine union with God. Okay, that's the supernal work of the supernal triad. So now we're going to start talking more about some of these other paths that cross the abyss. We've already talked a little about the path of Gamel, the camel who crosses the desert of the abyss. So the next one in order is we go from the Empress to the Emperor. This is the ruling aspect of the divine masculine. So we have over here the sphere of Hokmah connecting to Tiphareth. Tiphareth is our heart center, our Christ consciousness. It's the great integrator. When you look at the full tree, can you see Tiphareth here?
Yeah.
Okay. Tiphareth is the center of the tree, kind of physically as well as functionally. There are 8 paths which connect to Tiphareth, which is more than any other sphere by quite a bit. I think 1 or 2 may have 5 connecting, Nitzek and Hod, but there's a lot of integration work that takes place in Tiphareth. And so this path, divine wisdom and power of the masculine variety, connecting to heart center, which is also the sphere of the sun. And so what kind of energy would that be? Well, in Tarot it's called the Emperor. In the Kabbalic tradition, this is called He, or the window. And it's one of the paths, the 3 paths for the 3 Hebrew letters that form the Tetragrammaton, the collection of the 4 names of God. Yod, He, Vav, He. So Yod, He, Vav, and then He again is the Tetragrammaton. So you've got the Son, you've got the Father, you've got divine wisdom, you've got this integration of heart, this pure love. The Emperor is great symbolism for what that could represent. A wise emperor is neither overpowering nor domineering, nor is he weak and wimpy. Yes, this is pure love, but it has to be tempered with the father's discipline. Or looking at it another way, the father's potentially stern discipline has to be tempered with that pure divine love. And so that's what this path does, especially in the downward portion of sending energy into Tiphareth. On the way up, hey, window. This is the window from the heart center into the divine. You're looking up into the supernal triad. You're looking at a window into the divine Father in heaven at your peace. This is one of the major pathways that's used when we are discovering our true purpose, our true will. When we learn just what kind of crazy contract was it I signed when I came down here that I'm supposed to be doing. Oh, there's a window I can look at. Okay, let me come here. Open the shades. Open the window. What? Oh, I don't want to do that. But then we do it anyway, right? If we're doing our job. Like, who told me to do that? What do you mean I did? I said I would do that? No. Sorry, gang. But you did. You agreed. Wadib is doing her own chart. And that is absolutely positively the number one best way I know to learn this. You need to be able to draw it from scratch, put names on all the Sephiroth, and then draw the connecting pathways and put a name on them. And you can use the Kabbalic system, or you can use the Tarot system, or you can do what I do, which is I intermix and combine both, because they're inseparable descriptions of the same facet of nature, in my opinion. That's the opinion shared by Robert Wang in his book, The Kabbalistic Tarot.
Hang on, put it back.
The Kabbalistic Tarot by Robert Wang. He intermixes it. When you go into any of the sections on any of the paths or spheres, he's mixing the two in a very elegant way. And other than the swap between path 8 and path 11, which I hope we get to tonight, which he and 90% of the other authors have incorrectly, I really like his book a lot. It's probably my second favorite book for studying this material. The first being the one I talked about, the Practical Kabbalah Guidebook. So this is your window into your true purpose, is this pathway. It is the link between that stern general pattern aspect of the Divine Father in heaven that really wants to put heads on pikes, and that kind, loving WWJD, what would Jesus do? Christ-like love. This is the filter that tempers that, transmits energy in both directions, and has its own innate intelligence to help you connect. Now, these are interesting pathways, the ones at the sides, because they're not forming the triads. And these 5 paths in particular are interesting because they're the ones that cross the abyss. And I'm going to probably do a section on crossing the abyss in a week or two. So from Emperor, any questions on Emperor? I'll give you guys...
No, can you fill in the one on coming down the male pillar from Bina to Gabura?
Bina?
You said you didn't write it in.
I didn't write it in, but does anybody know it? I was waiting.
No.
Nobody knows it. Okay. I'm going to move this. Don't panic. It'll come back with writing on it. Oh, yeah. So, nobody gets a ding. This path over here, the Kabbalic name is Cheth, which means enclosure or fence, or kind of like a perimeter fence around a stable or a paddock is one of its historical uses. And the tarot card is the Chariot. Oh, Patricia must not be on. She would have known.
No, I don't see her on yet.
Yeah, she would have known Chariot. Probably. I know she knows the Chariot card, but would she have known that that's where it goes? I don't know yet. So, from the Emperor, the next card in order in terms of numbering. And the way these get numbered is you start at the bottom and they work down. So,
Start at the bottom?
you start at the bottom and you work down. And you start at the top and you work down.
Oh, thank you.
The other top, the other bottom. So 1, 2, and 3 are these paths here, or 0, 1, and 2 in the tarot. Then you come down, there's this path, and then so now we start numbering all the paths from the supernal triad down. And so we did emperor. Now we're doing one over here called the hierophant in the Tarot circles, or vow, which means nail. So like a metal nail, boom. The metal nail is something which unites, like two pieces of wood or two things, your arm to a cross, it's a great uniter. And that concept of nailing yourself to the cross is a little bit of what's held by the energy of this pathway. Now, the Hierophant is a supreme wise seeker and or a supreme wise teacher. Now, historically, from the time of the earliest Tarot onward, which was the 1300s, earliest known example of the Tarot onward, in the 1300s, that was a very dangerous time to be doing anything non-standard in terms of religion or spirituality. It was the time of the Spanish Inquisition. It was the time of, if the church decided they didn't like you, you were invited to a great big barbecue party where you were the guest of honor, so to speak. So one of the things that was done is the symbolism in the Tarot was modified by the artists to be very heavily Christian. The Hierophant and most of those decks, early decks that lasted right up until, you can still go buy decks that show this, is the Hierophant was shown as the Pope. This wise figure who is ruling the religion, and he was the one who is regulating the seeking and the teaching. So that was one of the ways, as well as symbolism on a few other paths. We'll talk about how it didn't automatically get you burned at the stake. Oh no, and they had these explanations and these writings that they justified everything in terms of Christian doctrine that was officially blessed and approved by the Roman Catholic Church, and that's how they didn't get burned at the stake. That's why you have the version of Kabbalah with a C, not the K and not the Q. So the C for Christian Kabbalah. But like I said, this information, especially the Hebrew version, far, far predates the rise of Christianity. And it's that unifying force that we have to look at here. So we have in the sphere of Chokmah the divine aspect of the Divine Father. Down here we have a very similar aspect in Hesed, which is the highest aspect of the male figure in the world. So the divine levels in the world. This is kind of what unites those two. And so you will have a symbol on this path of something to do with the father as the teacher, the son or the wise male here as the learner, the seeker. And what is that going to look like? Now, there's a lot of other symbolism associated with each of the Sephiroth. You can line up astrology, you line up just about anything you can imagine on these. And so my alchemical symbols and chemical elements and musical notes, and I'm not intending to go through all that. That's part of the lifetime of study, which I'm glad you're finally starting now, because the world could end tomorrow, and you need to know this because that's how you get across the abyss, is all of this. So prepare yourselves, because when we each die, this is what we're going to be doing. So practice now, learn the formula, and if you get far enough into your work and you take your consciousness on across the abyss, gain that state of consciousness and come back, it's going to help you help everybody else, and humanity upgrades. Remember, this is Toltec work. How do we use this most accurate roadmap to the energy of the universe to upgrade humanity? That's what we're doing here. So, the Hierophant. Any questions on the Hierophant?
Well, I had a comment about not the Hierophant, but the nail. So when I was studying the proto-Sinaitic symbols, which is a precursor to the Hebrew alphabet before Sinai, so before the flaming letters of the Hebrew alphabet would have come in.
Right.
They actually refer to this as the tent stake. And the enclosure then would have been the tent. So, back in a time when they didn't have houses and so forth, it seems like this makes a little more sense as far as, okay, now you're pitching your tent and you're setting your stakes for that foundation before you can go up any farther.
Right.
Beyond
Very
that.
good. Thank you for bringing that up. And for those who've never studied the Proto-Sinaitic language, you should. And we can teach you. For just $9.95, we'll $995.
Right.
We will teach the class on the Proto-Sinaitic language. Okay. Okay, so that's these two. These are the ones that connect Hokmah to Tiphareth and Hokmah to Hesed. So now we come over here to the path I've been alluding to several times tonight, the path of Zayin, which is the sword. And in the Tarot, it's called the Lovers. Now when you read the books about the Lovers card, just know this. Aleister Crowley, who's a famed Kabbalist and a famed esotericist and a famed tarot expert, says that the Lover's card is the hardest card to learn and the hardest card out of the 78 to master. So if you don't get it the first day, that's okay. You can keep going. And I'm sure by day 2 or 3 you'll get it, because I figure you're probably smarter than Crowley, because he was a genius, but he didn't get everything right. He's kind of like Newton in that regard. Everybody just assumed that because Newton was right and so cutting edge on so many things that everything he did was right. Well, time has proved that Isaac Newton was not infallible, and time has proved Aleister Crowley is not infallible. But he thinks this one's hard. Prove him wrong. You choose to make it easy. The sword. Let's start by talking about the sword. Which I just happen to have a small one right here. Just so you know, always be prepared. The sword cuts. It's a symbol for the mind and our mental nature and our ability to dissect and analyze problems and situations. It is the supreme divider in the culture in which this material developed. So this path is about division as well as reunification. The astrological sign on this pathway between Binah, the Divine Mother and the great creative force, and Tiphareth, the sun. That's this energy we're trying to unify. So you have the creative mother and you have the sun. And so this, in its division aspect, that's what the sword represents. And as you can see, that's just a finer splitting into the polarities, right? So some of the Divine Mother energy needs to end up in the sun. So when we get down here and we finally have covered all the pathways that intersect in Tiphareth, I'm going to go over this. If you really want to understand attaining the Christ consciousness as you work up the tree, using that to help humanity, using that to help you gain access to the upper triads, really understand the 8 energies coming into Tiphareth on these other pathways. That's going to be a key. So learn the basics, be able to draw the skeleton of the tree, and then identify them, and then just start learning more and more and more about the nature of each path and the nature of each sephira, which has 4 core natures on each one. That's why you end up with 40, right? And then over on to above on that, some of the Sephiroth also have the face cards associated with them, the court cards. That's the representation of each Sephira in the 4 worlds of the tree. The other aspect, the reunification aspect, this is ruled by Gemini, the astrological sign Gemini. Now, Gemini is the twins. Crowley was quoted once as saying, this card really should be called the brothers. But I think that's only one aspect of the card. The symbolism, I should have brought his card, his deck. His symbolism includes a lot of the alchemical symbolism that's associated with sexual alchemy. And so this path is a very key path for understanding sexual alchemy and how to reunify male and female forces and energies and use them to help cross the abyss and attain the highest levels of divine consciousness. So the Lover's card is very complex. I think it's much more so than the mirror image card over here, the Emperor. Did I have anything else I wanted to say about the Lover? No. We all have within us a divine masculine and a divine feminine, which I was alluding to earlier. Even if you're a big, strong warrior, it's okay to be kind. It's okay to cry when someone dies or your dog dies, or to be kind to help someone who needs help, to help a child, to help the elderly. And if you're a woman and you're used to nurturing and raising children and being kind and being a nurse and being a mother, it's okay to pick up a sword and take heads off if you need it. Think of the lioness or the female tiger. When somebody tries to harm her cubs, woe be to the individual stupid enough to do that, because that female tiger will rip your head off and then eat you. And that's the power of the male aspect in the divine feminine. So we each have that within us. So I have to nurture my divine feminine. Aurea over here has to nurture her divine masculine. And we both need to remember, all men, all women need to remember that the masculine and the feminine are very different. And thank God for that. Because I certainly wouldn't want to date me. Not if I'm me. So we have to nurture those dualities within us. We have to be okay with that. We have to be able to balance, the extremes. And balancing the extremes is what develops that center point, that strong pivot point around which everything revolves in our quest for higher consciousness and the ability to understand higher consciousness to help humanity. Because it's not just about us. We're here We have to attain. This is a little bit like the lecture they give you on the airplanes when you fly. Oh, if there's a loss of cabin pressure, meaning all the oxygen is leaking out because you just hit a bird or whatever, and you've got 30 seconds to a minute to get your oxygen masks on so you can breathe while the pilot tries to land the plane. They always tell you put your own mask on first before you try to help around. So a mother with 4 kids sitting around her, she's gonna naturally, oh, I gotta get little Johnny's on and little Mary's and Susie and Ricky didn't get their masks, right? So they tell you get yours on first. Oh, now I can help Susie and Ricky and Johnny and Betty and Fred and Martha and all of them. Anybody else around you who didn't get their mask on, you can help. So you've got to help yourself first. You've got to take your consciousness up the tree first and then help everybody else. Because we're all in this together, in this humanity thing. You know, there's this responsibility to help each other. There's a mandate to work together as one united humanity. Yeah, I'll bet the big problem with modern politics is nobody told them. All those politicians in Washington and Sacramento and everywhere else, we just need to tell them that we're supposed to be nice to each other and help each other, and then everybody can win. It's not the win-lose phenomenon. There was an old book 30 years ago or more called The Win-Win whatever, and it's based on the false belief, the limiting belief of the past, that if I win, you have to lose. Or if you win, then I lose. But in an infinite universe, you can win, I can win, she can win, he can win, they can win. We can all win. There doesn't have to be losers. Just a bunch of winners. So we just need to get this message out. And you can get this message out better if you win by taking your consciousness up the tree and you master yourself. This is, remember, in quest of self. So this male-female balance within us is one of the aspects of the Lover's card. Now, if you're a James Bond movie and the Tarot priestess you're trying to get information out of so you can kill her boss, you go out and you buy 78 identical Tarot decks and you pull the Lover's card out and you make a deck of 78 Lover's cards and you stack the deck and you tell her, pick a card. And she goes, oh, it's the Lovers. And of course, then Bond seduces her. And he didn't die in that movie, so you know that he won. And he eventually got the evil boss she was forced to work for. She wasn't doing it by choice. So, yeah, it's not just physical lovers between two people, although that's its most common interpretation. Sometimes when I've talked to people about tarot, that's how they will automatically pursue it. Interestingly enough, though, back in the earliest medieval times, it wasn't called lovers plural. It was lover singular. And it carried more of the symbolism and the imagery of you have to balance yourself. And apparently the artist didn't like that. It wasn't clear. So then they became called the Lovers. And the symbolism usually shows a male figure, a female figure, and some kind of uniting force like Cupid bringing it back together. Bringing the two lovers together. And different authors have described it in different ways. And it's in some of the Tarot references, it's often one of the longest cards with the longest description about it, except Crowley, who wrote what could be an entire book about the Fool card. He's got a book this thick and a quarter of it is the Fool card. So that falls into the category I sometimes describe as, why say in 100 words what could more easily be said in 1,000.
And that said, he gives a lot of different examples of what the fool's journey could be, and as the first trump in the journey,
Right.
I think it's important to really understand what that represents, because none of us want to call ourselves the fool. We think of the fool as a negative thing these days, when in fact it's that innocence that's necessary to embark on a path of truth.
Right. If I look back at myself, it's hard to say where my quest really began, but it really began formally when I fired organized religion when I was in the first grade. I didn't know what I was going to get myself into. And then even 10 or 15 years ago, if you told me I was going to become a shaman, I would have laughed at you and been horrified at the prospect. But we start a path, and if you're a scientist and you analyze the data fairly and honestly, and you look at each step of the path, you go where the data lead. You trust the process, and that's what the Fool card way up here, just to recapitulate, is attempting to teach us. And enough said about that. So that's the Lover's card. That's not even scratching the surface of the tip of the iceberg. There's so much about that, but that should get you started. The Chariot, Cheth, the house, the enclosure. You can think of this in some ways the way you described it over the weekend, which is this unstoppable force. You're moving down the male pillar from Binah into Gebra, which is the sphere of severity or the sphere of strength. And the Chariot, in ancient times, in warfare, the chariot, going way back, armies fought on foot. And then one of the great technological advantages in ancient warfare was, not just the sword, but the spear, the lance that could thrust further. So you had a sword and you had a spear, you had longer reach. And if you lined up a bunch of them side by side, spears, so then next thing you know, the next time you fight them, everybody's got to have a spear, but a sword is a backup. And then came the bow, the archers shooting, the early version of artillery from a much greater distance. But then once the horse started to be domesticated and used for a variety of purposes, it was mostly used for pulling wagons and heavy loads. And the first application in war of the horse came when somebody hooked it up to a two-wheeled cart, two-wheeled because they're more maneuverable and less likely to tip over, the two-wheeled cart, and built a short wall of basically armor around it. And they were often pulled by at least 2, but sometimes 4 horses. And they became the early version, or the equivalent of a tank. So starting in World War I, the tank, big armored thing that could drive up on any terrain and had a big cannon and machine guns. One tank could take out thousands of people in World War I, and did. Well, the early version of that was the chariot. The chariot would be hooked up. You get 3 or 4 big war chariots going on, pulled by 4 charging horses, and foot soldiers couldn't withstand it. You could smash the lines, smash their careful formations, and you could get one person driving the chariot and then 2 or 3 people in it throwing spears or shooting arrows, and it would wreak havoc and devastation on opposing armies. So that's the unstoppable force of this path, and it's this energy, this massive creative energy going down, pure strength, uniting creation with the sphere of strength. And it can be severe, hence the other name of Gebra, which is severity. And some Kabbalistic traditions, they call the male pillar the pillar of severity, not just the pillar of strength. Going back up, the chariot can be thought of as the conveyance which carries you across the abyss. The Hierophant energy, the seeker, is riding in the chariot. You've looked, there's choreography and balancing all these pathways across the abyss. And so there's a huge amount of integration that has to take place before that will eventually happen. Like I say, I'll say a little bit more about it, but ultimately that's the kind of thing you have to learn to do yourself. So prepare yourself as much as you can. So the chariot, the cheth, the enclosure, fixed fortifications were about the only things chariots couldn't deal with. So you've got the chariot forceful energy, you've got the chariot carrying you back over the abyss. In some esoteric circles you might hear of the divine ark, which carries us over the troubled waters. That's another allusion to this pathway and something carrying us where we need to get to.
I had a comment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mythology that talks about the chariot and the way it takes the sun into the sky and all of that.
Yeah.
And then the story of is it Prometheus?
Yeah.
Anyway, that takes Zeus's chariot and burns up the sky and stuff, which is kind of like that lower level of the masculine trying to use the tools of God to do what he does and really not having a handle on that. So it's like a story of somebody who did take the chariot into the sky before they were ready.
Yeah, the key is be ready. In terms of some of the Western alchemical traditions, the Western magical traditions, crossing the abyss is a big deal. For many, many centuries, it was assumed you couldn't do it and stay alive, that this crossing only occurred at death, until a few sincere seekers who were just doing their thing had prepared themselves, unbeknownst to themselves or anyone else, and they encountered the doorway and they went through and they attained a state of consciousness and they had experiences and they come back and they shared what they learned and what they saw. And after a period of time, enough people did that people who study this work, Kabbalists, with the Q and whatnot, the Western alchemical traditionists, began to realize that, it's actually possible to cross the abyss and not die. And so that has become kind of the holy grail of this type of work, the higher consciousness work. So I know people who've succeeded in this, crossing the abyss. I know people who claim to have done it but failed. So don't be one of those that fails. Don't do it too soon. And do your preparation, and you'll know when the time is right.
From a Christian mysticism point of view, you could say that Christ showed that process.
He did.
By overcoming death and then returning. And
he did it a very unique way that I'm not quite sure I'm ready to duplicate. I'll do the one where you stay alive, if I can. But I'm not ready for that final crossing yet. I have work to do here and preparations to complete. And so someday I'll probably do that. We'll see. So anyway, that's just a little bit about the path of the chariot. And you're starting to see there's some left, right, top, bottom correlations and relationships between these pathways, some balancing. So the Hierophant rides the chariot. I just can't envision the Pope getting in a war chariot and doing anything.
We got the Pope-mobile.
Yeah, he got the Pope Mobile because he got shot. I can't imagine anybody wanting to shoot the Pope. I just really can't imagine why. Okay, so if there's no questions coming in on the chat feed tonight, we're going to move on now to the first path in what's known as the ethical triad, and that's the path of justice. And this requires some numbers and it requires some discussion. So I'm going to put some numbers on here, and these are going to be Tarot numbers. Starting with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And 9, 10, and this one is 11. And that one would be 12. Okay. So one of the great additions, one of the many wise things Aleister Crowley contributed to the process of Tarot was to realizing that all the numerology came out correct if you start the numbering of the paths with 0 as opposed to 1. And then everything gets better. Go read his book, which I don't have here, the Book of Thoth, and it goes through that. So down here, this path between Gebra and Hesed in that system is path 8, and the path between Gebra and Tiphareth is path 11. And I've drawn those numbers in just to prove my point. Most tarot decks, or at least today, many tarot decks, assign the tarot card to path 8 as strength, and the tarot card down here on path 11 they call justice. Crowley wasn't the first to think that those two were reversed, but he put forth the strongest argument that yes, this path must be justice and this path must be strength. So one of the ways, and I don't know that this is the only way he analyzes it, and I don't even remember if this is exactly the way he analyzes it at all, but this is the way I analyze it, is you have the sphere of strength or severity in what's known as the ethical triad. And over here you have the path or the sphere of mercy. So in the Kabbalistic systems, this is sometimes called the pillar of mercy, and in some it's called, based on Hesed, the pillar of wisdom, because Hesed is, or I'm sorry, Chokmah is wisdom. So to balance strength or severity with mercy or mildness, you need a force that will balance those, and neither will overpower the other. From the ethical point of view, the balancing point between strength and mercy we could think of as justice. What is truly right on an ultimate scale of right and wrong, good and evil. Okay? Both for yourself or for others. If this path is called the pillar of strength, you have a sphere of strength and a path of strength trying to interface with a sphere of mildness, a sphere of mercy. Mercy would be overwhelmed by strength, and that would be a concept of tyranny, which is not how you balance the ethical triangle. That would be justice gone bad. You would have tyranny.
I can't read what's above justice.
Oh, Teth or serpent. I haven't gotten
Serpent,
it.
okay.
It says serpent. Yeah. We'll come back to that concept of serpent energy later. But that's the name in the Kabbalic system. Mm-hmm. So yeah, because I really, other than what I've just said, I haven't really gone into this path yet. Down here, the path of strength is, or the path 11, let's call it that. The Kabbalic system calls Lamed, or the ox goad. So ox goad is a tool that leads the ox, moves it around, so it directs force. And the force is coming from Geberah into Tiphareth. So that was there thousands of years before this whole notion of the Tro assignments to the Tree of Life came into consideration, right? So you have a need to guide power. And down here in Tiphareth, when you look at all the inputs to Tiphareth, the Christ consciousness, you need strength. You need to get that power coming in. That is then tempered with the paths like the high priestess, like the lovers, the hermit, which we haven't talked about, the emperor. But there has to be a certain amount of strength. That's the aspect of Tiphareth that causes Christ to pick up his whip and drive the moneylenders out of the temple. If you're just pure meekness and mildness and love, and you say, oh, they're defiling the temple. Okay. No. Keep in mind, as above, so below. This isn't just the universe and the temple we're trying to create for humanity. It's your temple. And when you have moneylenders or other evildoers getting into your temple, you pick up a whip, you pick up a sword, you pick up whatever weapon you have around you, like your Sagittarius cup over here, and you wield it however you need to drive evil out of your temple. You must have a strength input. If strength was up here and this was justice, you'd be, well, yeah, justice. That could be good. It could be bad. No. You've got to have a strength input into Tiphareth. So that's kind of my version of what is known in Tarot circles as the 8-11 swap. Crowley's Thoth book talks about it. Some of the others talk about it. Some of them will talk about it and then try to justify keeping it the old way. I know of one author who says, well, you can really assign any tarot card to any path and make a case for it, so it really doesn't matter. Which is a ultimate cop-out in my mind.
So why write a book?
Right. Why write a book trying to help people get this right? And I do not believe at this point in human history of doing what they did in medieval times, doing what they did even in the early 20th century, of deliberately confusing and deliberately publishing false leads and reversals like this to confuse the uninitiated, just to protect the information. If there's things that I'm going to say, then I'm just going to say it as it is. And if there's things I think shouldn't be said in the tarot I'm writing or the book on the Tree of Life I'm writing, then I just won't say them. And I might just tell you there's something else to be had here that you have to go find through your own meditations and your own work. But I'm not going to publish lies. I may get something wrong from time to time, but I'm not going to do it deliberately. And if I get it wrong, as soon as I find out it's wrong, I'll fix it. But the 8-11 swap you will see, and the majority of tarot decks I pick up and I look at, they have it wrong. Now, when you're republishing the weight deck from 150 years ago, okay, you want to be true to the history, fine. But if you're publishing a tarot deck from the late 20th century onward, anything in this century, this is known. This is like continuing to publish false scientific information because, well, in the 1400s they believed that the body was ruled by humors, so I'm going to ignore all of chemistry and biology that we've learned in the last 500 years, and I'm only going to publish about the humors. You can do that, and nobody will buy your book, and nobody will believe you. if they do buy it and read it. So I believe in publishing the truth as I know it. And I won't mislead you. This material is involved enough and complicated enough that it's hard enough to learn that you don't need me deliberately confusing you to prove that you're worthy. There. That's the 8-11 swap. Justice belongs here, strength down there. So let's talk a little bit more about justice. The serpent was a symbol of power for the lawgiver as well as the medical people. It's a symbol for the Kundalini force, which is more vertical on that center pillar. But Moses had his serpent, or his staff, which would turn into a serpent and devour the staves, serpents of Pharaoh's magicians, right? If you want to go back to an Old Testament story. But he was the lawgiver, right? Moses brought the law down, and his symbol was a serpent. So that is another little tidbit that points to this path needs to be justice. It's the balance between mercy and force. You don't want to over-apply force. You don't want to under-apply it and over-apply mercy. You know, at some point, you know, the criminal has to be held accountable. That's where the strength comes in. And at some point, you know, it's okay to be merciful if greater good will come from mercy than force. That's the energy of the path of justice, and that is appropriate as the balancing path in the ethical triad. Any questions or comments coming through?
We have a guest named Angela22 with us today. And she was commenting on when you were talking about the lovers
Okay.
and the sword. She called that the sword of truth. And then when we were talking about the fool, she said the fool reminds her of the hero's journey.
Well, exactly. Let's pause there. And she has other comments. We'll get to that. The hero's journey, of course, for those who aren't familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, Campbell analyzed the mythology and the literature from all over the world and realized, except for names and hair colors and what kind of clothes they wore, they all told the same story. And it's now called the hero's journey. And if you want a great lesson in the hero's journey, there's 2 or 3 things I can refer you to. One is the original Star Wars film, Luke Skywalker. As he goes through the hero's journey, or he goes through that movie, that was specifically and deliberately written with knowledge of Campbell's work to tell this story. And that's why it resonated and became revolutionary. People thought at the time it was because of the special effects. That was one of the first films that had such an overuse, if you want to call it that, of special effects. You know, with the explosions and the spaceships and all that. It was never done before because it wasn't just animation. It was cutting edge. But his journey, if you go read this hero's journey, every single step, you know, you're living in your own simplified world, something bad happens, and you have to be tricked by the wise old person to go out into the cold, cruel world. So you think that, oh, he's living there. Yeah, I thought about going out in the world, but oh, I guess I have to stay here and help my uncle on the farm for another season. And you know, maybe we'll have enough dehydrators then that we can, or hydrators that we can have enough farm that we can afford money, and then my uncle will be okay to continue farming. Well, then I'll go to the academy and learn to fly spaceships. And then the droids come, and the stormtroopers come and they kill the uncle and the aunt, but he still doesn't want to go. And it's Obi-Wan Kenobi who tricks him, the wise old man. And then he goes through a series of increasing levels of trials. And that's the fool. He's now out on his journey. Each path through the tree of life is increasing levels of trials. So, yeah, that's right. That's the start of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell looked at that and basically came up with this realization that cultures all over the world are telling the same story because they're tapping in to these archetypal energies, and they're trying to teach how to live our life and how to raise ourselves.
And do your will.
And do your true will. Yeah, you've got to do your true will. So what else does Angela 20...
So she says, please, can you talk about the tower in the Tarot? So it looks like that's coming up next week.
That'll probably be next week, but as a teaser, I'll talk about that a little bit. I've gotten through Justice. Let me just say a couple things. I wanted to get through Hermit and the Strength. So, the Hermit card, this is the path of Yod, which is the finger of God. It's the first name in the Tetragrammaton, Yod. It's that finger that's pointing the way. So when we get back to looking more at the whole tree, and we leave on Malkuth at the bottom, we go up to the astral triad, we balance that, then we move up into the middle triad with Tiphareth, and then we start balancing this whole ethical triad. These paths and this triad prepare us for what's up here. So when we work individual paths, we work on the individual aspects of individual spheres, it's important to keep the big picture in mind, which is this is all preparation for crossing the abyss and attaining the consciousness of God. Earth is a training ground to become like God. This is what the city Teotihuacan is named after. The great city of the Toltecs was called the city where gods are made. The city where gods are forged. Either made or forged. I like forged for several other reasons. But so this is the triad. This needs to be stable before we cross the abyss. And that's the key mistake of many people who've attempted to cross the abyss and failed. They didn't have their ethical triad balanced. So here, this is the finger of God. This points us in the direction. It unifies the worldly Father with the divine Son, the Christ consciousness. And the worldly Father is providing direction. This is the instruction of our worldly Father and that energy to us manifesting our fullness in the Christ consciousness. Moving back up, and a lot of these you'll see that the Hebrew symbolism is coming down, the Tarot symbolism is going up. Not always, and you can make a case for both of them going both directions. But the Hermit, you haven't reached the bottom of the tree on the Fool's Journey, but the Hermit is more about coming back up, in my opinion. The Hermit card is always shown as the solitary old dude in a cave in the mountains, wearing a cloak and a hood, carrying a lantern. The lantern represents that inner light, that inner knowledge, that gnosis that we have to have in us before we cross the abyss. So it's a certain level, you can think of it as wise prudence. You've been there, you've done that, you've seen it all, you can't be shocked, you have a knowing. You know, this is Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kid movies, right? Karate do yes, okay. Karate do no, okay. Karate do gesso, squish, just like grip. So that's Mr. Miyagi. He's been there, he's done that, he went through World War II, he's living his life, his wife has died, he's got a collection of antique cars that need waxed, and Daniel-san shows up and learns to wax on, wax off. So that's the hermit. That's the wise old guy who's got it all figured out, and he's taught what he can, he's done what he can, and at some point you have to separate yourself from the world. I really wanted to do that at one point in my life, but I wasn't ready to go off to Alaska and be a hermit. I had to stay here and do my will. Sometimes I think, God, yeah, fishing in Alaska every day, that'd be kind of cool. But no, I'm here to do something else. Someday, maybe I'll get to be a hermit. But we'll see. Over there, I've already talked a little bit about it, is the path of strength. It's that ox goad. It's the energy that takes that force when needed. This is the lioness who rips apart anybody after her cubs. This is Christ driving moneylenders out of the temple. This used to be shown in the Tarot circles, more when it was up here, not when it was down here, as a woman riding a lion. And of course there's different alchemical symbols there. I don't necessarily agree with that being the best symbolism for the card down in this position. So there's that strength and power when needed, and these are kind of some mirror image paths. There's some mirror action. You've got the strength and you've got the hermit. So the hermit, it's like Mr. Miyagi. Yeah, I could beat you up, but I don't need to, right? So the three of those combined, those energies, make up the ethical triad of Gebra, that force and strength, and that fatherly, worldly teacher and guide, and Christ consciousness, pure love, that heart center. And when all those are in balance and all three pathways are functioning and you have a solid triad and you've been going down regularly and balancing your Malkuth and your astral triad and everything's ready, then you're ready to cross the abyss. So, let me move this out of the...
I had a couple comments about the finger. Reminds me of the painting of, in the Sistine Chapel, of God touching the finger of Michael. And
that was Adam.
it was, Michael and Adam are the same person.
Oh, okay.
But the point is that it's just that finger touching thing, you know. It's actually, you know, God. It's that God spark kind of. So you have us in this lower form, not the lowest form, but a higher aspect, receiving that touch of God. And then there's several scriptures or scriptural stories about where you know, someone who had enough faith that they could see the finger of God, you know, just kind of, and even they had enough knowledge to believe that that if he would just touch this thing, that it would, you know, it would do what it needed to do. And so there's that where you got to almost bring it up to that point, just like the image of Michael. He's brought it up to this point, and now he's got to connect. With
all
God.
good examples.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for those. Those are excellent. So now what I want to do for, is it Angela 21 or 22?
22.
Angela 22. By the way, Angela 22, how did you find us? And who are you? What I have here is the tree, and this path here. So we've talked about up to here, and I didn't draw any of this lower portion, which I'll get to next week. But Hod, our mental nature, Nitzak, the sphere of the causal plane, as well as the sphere of intuition, is our mental nature, our intuitive nature. When we start climbing up the tree with our consciousness, we go from the physical world of Malkuth to Yesod, kind of the start of our psychic nature, intuition, over here on the path of the moon, and over here is the path of the sun, and we get our mental nature, and then is the path here. This is, in the Kabbalic terms, this is the path of Pei, which means mouth, and that's the tower path. So the tower card in the tarot always shows some kind of tower, usually being struck by lightning and or a earthquake or hurricane, and the tower is crumbling and falling apart. People are falling off, and it's total destruction of that little world. And there's a lot of fear associated with that card when people drive, oh my God, my world's falling apart. Yep, that's exactly what it means. Your world is falling apart, but it has to if you're going to advance. This is the process of the caterpillar and the chrysalis becoming a butterfly. I mean, think about it from the caterpillar's point. Something drives him to eat and 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 eat, and finally he has enough energy stored up that some innate part of him is triggered to build this cocoon thing. He wraps himself up. And he goes into a hibernation-like sleep. And while he's there, who knows what kind of dreams he has going on, his whole body disintegrates. Literally, cells come apart and they get glued back together, and organs disappear, and all those little feet disappear, and then what emerges is this gorgeous butterfly. And moths do the same thing. Moths and butterflies, and when all that's done, that innate force drives him to chew a hole in that chrysalis and crawl out, and he lets his wings dry off, and then you've got a butterfly. Okay? That total destruction of the old world and the creation of the new is the tower card. And when you start doing higher spiritual work, it's guaranteed to happen. You can't hold on to the old like an anchor and fly. You can't keep one foot on shore and swim across the ocean. So you're going to find that things that used to interest you don't anymore. People you used to hang with, you can't talk to them, they can't talk to you. Man, what happened to Angela? She's just, we can't talk to her anymore. You know, she's all about this weird stuff, and she's talking about gurus and tarot and higher consciousness, and man, she doesn't even like to hang out and drink beer and play darts and watch football anymore. You know, what's wrong with her? And then you go on, you leave your engineering career, and 99% of your friends don't talk to you once you become a naturopathic doctor. And then you leave your naturopathic doctor career to go off and become an energy medicine specialist and study shamanic philosophies. And 99% of your naturopathic and healing friends won't even talk to you anymore. And so on you go, because you're driven by this innate force that my path to serve humanity uses all those building blocks. My engineering friends would be horrified to think that I use more physics now as a shaman than I did when I was an engineer. But it's actually true. And all the weird stuff that I studied when I had my undergrad in physics, like quantum mechanics and chaos theory and relativity, that I never used once when I was launching space shuttles or building satellites for a living, I use daily now. And I've changed careers, I've changed relationships, I've changed houses, I've changed what state I live in. All my old life crumbled away. And if I kept trying to hang on to it while the world was crumbling around me, it would have destroyed me. And so every true seeker I know who attains any level of proficiency in the higher consciousness work, every one of them has a story about the people, the places, the things in their life that got left behind. Their world crumbled. And it had to, because what comes out the other side, just like the caterpillar morphing into a butterfly, is far more elegant and far more capable of performing at a higher level than anything from the olden days. It's why the butterfly is used in Toltec symbolism as one of the symbols of that transformation. We have the symbol, I don't have it handy, maybe I'll show it next week. It'll be appropriate for the Tower card, as the it's called the celestial butterfly, and it's the Toltec equivalent of the yin-yang symbol, if you know the yin-yang symbol. So anyway, the Tower card represent a necessary transformation, and the more you resist that when it starts to happen, the more it appears that your life is being destroyed. Hence that symbol, Kushung, lightning destroying your world. So I hope that's a good start, yeah.
So I think when you take these cards, like the tarot cards, and you place them on the tree of life, you know, you get a better idea of what kind of work you're doing. This isn't the horizontal path. It's not about maintaining the status quo. It's not about, you know, love, peace, and blissing out. You're doing a vertical path. You're going up. And in one way, that kind of represents like a glass ceiling, where people below that think that they're doing the higher work, and yet they're, you know, very hardly above the dream world. So it seems like there's another, in the next triad up, there's also another kind of glass ceiling, like, okay, well, you've been up there in Tiphareth now, doing all this higher level work, and to push beyond that, which, what did we just say that was? Strength? Justice would be the next one going across between.
Right.
That really, to do that crossing of the abyss and coming back, you have to be able to completely destroy or allow yourself to be destroyed and know enough about yourself to put it back together.
Exactly.
And so in one way, they're kind of, you know, at different levels of the same kind of energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to a certain extent, the Empress card, the Daleth path, can be thought of as, at the highest level, that ultimate unification between polarities. So, Angela, does that answer some of your questions about Tiphareth, and perhaps get you thinking of it in a different way?
Tower, not Tiphareth.
Oh, not Tiphareth, the Tower
And if
path.
you join us next week, we'll be talking about that
Yeah.
more in relation.
So basically, I'll be starting with the path leading down from the ethical triad. So out here we've got the Wheel of Fortune, over there is the Hanged Man, and then everything down below, all those paths. And hopefully we'll get through that all in one session. because then you'll have had the basics and we'll be able to actually start doing something practical with all this knowledge, because that's what it's for. Contrary to some of the mystics who say, oh no, we dare not use all this high level mystical knowledge. We'll just overlook that part that God created man in his own image and we're supposed to be trying to become like him, but we're just going to sit back and watch. We're not going to engage. So, like Jean-Luc Picard says, engage. So, did we get anything else back from Angela?
No, she had said that she had had a nervous breakdown after pulling that card. Not long after it, Mohadib shared that she has got the Tower card in every tarot reading this year, which we know a little bit about her life this year, so all that makes sense, and she's surviving it. She's not allowing.
You have to embrace it. If the caterpillar is in his little chrysalis and is fighting change, it ain't going to go well. Yeah. I saw a cartoon once on the internet. I probably saved it somewhere in the bowels of my computer. It shows, it's like your little coffee house or wine bar, and there's a caterpillar sitting at one chair talking to his friend who's now a butterfly. And he says, I don't understand you. You've changed. And the butterfly friend says, yeah, we're supposed to. So that's the Tower card.
Yeah. She also mentioned that she feels like it's a shadow type of the alchemical process.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah. It absolutely, it's going to force you to balance that. The shadow self and the underworld, we're going to talk about later when we get into the practical aspects and the different meditations of how you can use this and start to understand them and start to balance these within you. The one of the paths here between Hod and Tiphareth is the ultimate card for dealing with the shadow self, and we'll get to that next week. And you can't get to that point until you balance that Tower card and everything. So it's really preparation for that shadow work. And in shamanism, we deal with both halves of the yin-yang symbol, not just the light, fluffy half. You've got to be able to deal with the darkness, because the first place you got to look is inside yourself. And this will be a nice segue before we stop, because going back to Star Wars and the second Star Wars movie called The Empire Strikes Back, Luke is off on, what was the name of that planet? Dagobah. And he meets Yoda, and Yoda sends him at one point into the cave and tells him, no, leave your weapons here, you don't need them. And of course Luke ignores the instruction from his teacher, takes his weapons, goes in there, meets this dark, shadowy, evil-looking Darth Vader-like appearing character, and he kills it. And the head falls off, and the mask pops open, and it's Luke. So that was Luke's first confrontation with his shadow self. So, knowing that that's one of the cards we talk about next week, we're going to end it there, unless there's any final questions or comments.
You might want to just mention calendar stuff coming up. You already mentioned some stuff, but unless they go back and watch that again, they won't know about the thing in EJ's and then the Avatar of the Earth thing.
Right. So, not this coming weekend in a few days, but the next weekend, we're going down to assist EJ in his school with some physical labor and moving. And then the week after that, we have a big event here in Mount Shasta called Avatars of the Earth. It's sponsored by a woman named Tracy Ash, who is in...
she's international.
She's international, based out of Great Britain somewhere. And we'll be speaking at that on how do we fix the world? How do we get humanity to wake up and realize that humanity as a whole is in the Tower card, and we have to change and transform, and if we don't, humanity will be destroyed. So change is required. How do we do that and be as successful as possible? So email us or contact us if you don't have the links to attend. There's a lot of powerful speakers. These are all healers and spiritual teachers from all over the world will be here, right here in Mount Shasta for that event. And then a week or two after that, we have an Akadwa Level 1 class that's focusing on consciousness, and I don't have enough memorized other.
I think that's it for the short term.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the new people. Please like our channel so that we get numbers up to a certain point, so we get our own channel name and we get higher search ratings. So more and more people can find us and these teachings and this truth for humanity. All right? Do good, avoid evil.